much better than I could. So we ask Rabbi Yasker to welcome everyone as we here at Torah Or recognize today as Yom HaZikaron.
Thank you,
Rabbi
Rabbi
Yasker,
Green. Yeah, thank you for your efforts, and thank Cheryl for making this opportunity available to us. Rav Soloveitchik, on the 10th anniversary of Yom HaAtzmaut, noted that one way to identify that which is kadosh, holy, is to observe if sacrifice is involved. We have a beautiful Medina, a thriving state of Israel, a modern, dynamic country on the top of many charts worldwide. Yom HaZikaron reminds us that all this vibrancy and holiness has come with much sacrifice, and too often the ultimate sacrifice. This morning, we will hear one individual's personal story. It's a story of loss, I believe, also about rebirth. To know one person's challenge, in truth, brings us much closer to understanding the reality of numbers that we sometimes read. Not numbers don't reveal the true depth of pain and sacrifice. And so I want to you know acknowledge the special opportunity that this morning's presentation will give us on this Yom HaZikaron. And I thank Piera Price Edelman for sharing, being willing to share that with us. May we all have a meaningful day and be able to look forward to Besorot Tovot, Geula Shlema, and all in good health. Piera.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your very special words of introduction, and I totally agree with everything that you said. So thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be with here. It's a real privilege to be able to talk to you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, thank you for the thumbs up. And I will soon start my talk. I would just like to, you know what, when I have to do share screen, I'll do it. And then I'll just make sure that everything there is ready for when I want to show you what I want to show you. There's not much, there's just two things. I also want to just thank Cheryl very much for organizing this and for making the suggestion that I come and talk to you. And we're old friends going back from grade, I don't know what, in school, and we just renewed contact recently in the last year. So it's very special for me to be here as Cheryl's guest and to be here as yours as well. So I'm going to begin my story with just a very general background of where I come from. I'm also from Durban, South Africa, like Cheryl, and went to the Jewish Day School Carmel College with Cheryl. And I grew up in a very mixed family in terms of level of religious observance. My mother, who is still alive in Jerusalem at 92, she is traditional. My father, Zichrono Livracha, who died 25 years ago, was very irreligious and basically an atheist. My big brother is religious and lives in Jerusalem, and my other brother is not religious and is married to a non-Jewish woman in England. So we've got the whole spectrum of people in our family, and I grew up with this basic pluralistic worldview due to how my family relates to Judaism. I came on Aliyah when I became religious myself when I was like 8 years old. It was not really intentional. The daughter of the rabbi of our community was my best friend, and I just got into keeping mitzvot without really thinking about it. But by the time I was bat mitzvah, I decided that this is how I want to live my life. My family was very Zionist, and so I came on Aliyah when I was 17 after my schooling. And for the first year, I went to a school in Jerusalem, Machon Gold, which some of you may have heard of, where girls go to study with the intention of going back to their hometowns to teach at schools. But I did come on Aliyah. My brother Ilan was already here 9 years before me. And that was how my life began in Israel. And then that was in 1979. And in September of 1980, I went to study at Bar Ilan University. I studied music major and psychology minor with the intention of going into music therapy, but I didn't finish that in the end. But in the year 1981, around February time, around Tu B'Shvat time, the rabbi who I became religious to, Rabbi Weiss, his daughter Dina, invited me to come with her to the yeshiva Kerem B'Yavne near the Yavne area, near the Ashdod area, because her father had studied in Kerem B'Yavne, and the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Goldwicht, had invited Dina to come for Shabbat, and she invited me to come with her. So we went for Shabbat. It was a very special time. And then on the Saturday night, on Motzei Shabbat, the rabbi said to us, why don't you come for Purim? Because it was due to be in 3 weeks' time. And Dina said I should go with her. And I said, take somebody else. They will enjoy it. I've had the privilege one Shabbat. Take another friend. And she said, no, it's got to be you. And her decision basically changed my life. So I went with her on Purim, and I was with her through, all the activities and the Megillah reading and the party and the meal and everything. And we ended very late, way after midnight. And a South African friend named Stephen, accompanied Dina and me back to the home of Rav Goldwicht so we could go to sleep. But he remembered on the way home that there were posters in the dining room that were important for us to see. And I said, but it's late, let's go to bed. And he said, no, you've got to see these posters. So so we went back to the dining room, and that was where I met my first husband, Chovav Landoy, or Lando. Their family says Landoy. So his full name was Chovav Menachem Landoy, and I met him then. And it was no big deal, but then 2 weeks later, I met him at a bus stop in Jerusalem on a Friday morning. I'd spent an evening in Jerusalem, and I slept at Dina's place. And when I went to the bus stop the next morning, Chovav was standing there. And I wasn't sure if he was him, and he wasn't sure if I was me. So we ascertained that between us. And then we got onto the bus together. And to cut a long story short, we were talking about South African friends, and he mentioned somebody, and he hinted to me that he would like to see me again. And so I was all excited that he wanted to meet me again. And my friends thought that I was a bit crazy and dreaming dream castles in the air. But it turned out that I was right. He did want to see me. And the week after, I met him of the Hilton Hotel. He bought me orange juice because I didn't have any money for anything else. And that was how our connection began. And it was very special, our period of dating. We went out for 2.5 months, and then we got engaged. So I just want to I want to go into share screen now, because I want to put on the presentation that I made, which is only photographs and the titles of the photographs. And I just want to interrupt myself to get that organized. I also want to just make sure, okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, so sorry. Okay, can everybody see this? Sorry, I forgot to take it to page 1, but can you see the presentation? You got it. Okay, thank you very much. So, so this is Chovav. When we were, just dating, and I didn't have my head covering on then, and in the spring and summer of 1981, and I had just gone to South Africa. I was coming back, and this was taken at the airport. And we, as I say, we got engaged 2.5 months after going out, and he proposed to me on the beachfront of Tel Aviv. And I found the proposal that he wrote to me a few days ago in an old album, and it's gone totally, all the writing has been almost totally faded out. But I did manage to discover what was written there, because I did know what was written there. So in English, it says, Dear, it didn't say, it's in Hebrew, but I'm translating, Dear Piera, these short words speak for themselves and no more need be said. I have a small request, will you be my wife? And it was very touching and very sweet and very moving. So of course I agreed. And then we got married on the second night of Hanukkah, on the 21st of December, 1981. My parents came from South Africa for the wedding, and everybody was very excited, of course. You can see here on the left is Chovav's father, Dov. You'll see him in a minute. This is the family. These are my parents, and Chovav and me, and my brother Ilan and his wife Rivka. My brother from England, Howard, and his wife Lynn couldn't come, so I just put a photo here so that you would see what they look like, that they shouldn't be left out. And this is a photo of the Landoy family. This is Shula, the mother, and Dov, the father. And then there's Dudu, the oldest brother, and his wife Michal at the very end on the right, and their son Omer being held by somebody else. And that is Ofer, the brother of Chovav, and his sister Libya. So it's Shula and Dov, the parents, Dudu and Michal, the brother and sister-in-law, Ofer and Libya, the other siblings. After we got married, oh, sorry, I just have to say one more thing. This is a picture of Ze'ev Reutman, Chovav's best friend. He filmed and edited our wedding movie, and they were really, really very close friends. And Ze'ev was like what they say in Hebrew, a ben bait in our home. He used to come to us often. We used to meet often. And so I just, this connects to later on in the story. So I wanted to put it out here already now. Soon after we got married, about 2 months after we got married, Chovav decided that he really wants to go to America, because a lot of his friends in Kerem B'Yavne were from the States, and he really wanted to meet them on their own turf and to just get to know them in their own cities and homes, and to understand the mentality better, and to get a better idea of who they are and where they come from. So we went to New York in April of 1982. We stayed with Rabbi Weiss and his family, and it was really special to see everybody. And it was snowing at the time. And actually, I was at the very beginning of my pregnancy. Chovav knew almost before me that I was pregnant, because I was nauseous and stuff. But eventually I got the idea, and we actually did the pregnancy test in New York. And I phoned my parents and told them that they're going to have a grandchild, and Chovav phoned his parents, and it was all very exciting. We came back to Israel on Yom HaZikaron, on the day that we are on today, exactly 39 years ago. And for me, Yom HaZikaron at the time was a a bit of a strange day because I didn't really understand what it was all about. I understood the meaning of it, but I didn't know any bereaved families myself. And I didn't connect with the day on a personal level. And it was almost like a day where one waits for it to end in order to get into your Matzmaut. So it was a very strange day for me. Soon after that, after we came back from America, Chovav got a call up to the army to reserve duty. And it was just a regular call up. We knew that he was going to be away for about 2 weeks and then he would come home again. And we had planned our the beginning of our future together. We were going to go and we were going to go and work in a special school for girls that had a dormitory, and we were going to take an apartment there, and he was going to be the madrich of 12th grade girls, and I was going to be the madricha of 11th grade, and we were going to have our baby and buy a car with my rights as an ola chadasha, as an immigrant, and we had it all planned out. But then he got this call up, we knew that on the 10th of June, on the Wednesday, or the 9th of June, the Wednesday, he was going to go into reserve duty. But then things changed because on the Friday, the 4th of June, the Israeli ambassador in England was shot at. And this created a whole lot of tension with the Palestinian, Arab, Lebanon, all these different countries. I'm not quite sure of the connection between the two, but I understood that the shooting of the Israeli ambassador in England had triggered part of the trigger of the war of Lebanon, the first Lebanon war. And of course, the main reason for going into Lebanon was because of the terrible lack of quiet on the Lebanese border, and all the katyushot, all the rockets that were being thrown into the Israeli part of Lebanon. I'm sorry, my English is not perfect. And so this was what triggered the first Lebanon war, which was at the time called Operation Peace for Galilee. And on the 6th of June, on the 5th of June, on Saturday night, Chovav's father came to our home to tell us, because we didn't have a phone, he came to tell us that Chovav's brother Ofer had been called up to the army on an emergency call up. And I didn't really understand what all that meant because I didn't really know how these things work. And I really didn't have the background, the Israeli background. But then on Sunday morning, it seemed like things were a little bit normal, but I didn't understand what was brewing. That morning I went down to the pay box, the payphone on our road, to tell my mother that she could tell everybody that I'm expecting, because the 3 months of the first trimester had gone by and it was now safe to tell everybody. And my mother was delighted to be able to tell everybody their news. And then later on that morning, Chovav and I we left home to go out to our different activities for the day. I went to Bar Ilan University. Chovav went to do some errands before his reserve duty that would be a few days later. And on the way, on the path on the way to the bus stop, he said something to me that at the time I didn't understand why he was saying it. It was only a few days or weeks later that it sunk in. He said, you know, you're much more religious than the girls that I went out with before. Not that he had so many girlfriends, but those that he did have. And I said, well, I don't know. What do you mean? He says, well, you're just more like religious than them. And I said, well, I don't know, because they know so much and they learned so much and they went to these girls' schools and they have so much knowledge of Judaism and Jewish sources and everything. And he said, no, but you have a lot of faith, and that is very, very special. And I think that stands you in good stead, and it's something good to have in life. And at the time, it sort of went in one ear and out the other. I didn't understand what he was trying to say to me. But after everything happened, I could appreciate what he was trying to say to me at the time. Anyway, so he went off to his day of errands. I went to Barilan, and when I came home that afternoon, on the Sunday afternoon, the 6th of June, I saw that he was packing a bag. And I said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, actually, they brought our reserve duty forward, and I have to already go today." So I started crying a little bit, and I said, "Well, what should I do?" And he says, "Well, as we planned, you're going to go to my parents for 2 weeks, and then I'll come back and everything will be okay, and we'll carry on with our lives." So I said, "Okay." He said, "My dad will come and get you tonight. It's all okay." So he was ready. He'd finished packing his bag. He asked me if I want him to phone me from the intercom downstairs on the first floor. And I said, "No, that's too, this is difficult enough for me as it is. So I'd rather not." So we said our goodbyes to each other, and he left the house and he waved goodbye, went down the stairs. And that was basically the last time that I saw him. I didn't know that at the time, of course. And a few hours later, his father came to get me and took me back to their home. They lived in Ramat Gan. We lived in a neighborhood called Kiryat Herzog near Bnei Brak, very close by. So I went to their home, and in their home, there was my mother-in-law and father-in-law, of course, Shula and Dov, and Dudu's wife, Michal, with their 2 children, and my sister-in-law, Libya. And so I moved in with them, and every day I went to Bar-Ilan University as usual. And I didn't really follow the news. I was in Israel 3.5 years by then, and I did know Hebrew very well. I was married to an Israeli, but to follow the news for me was a little bit much. And I wasn't a kind of person to follow the news as it is. I was a bit flighty and in a bit of a dream world, I think. So I didn't really know what was going on. But to the extent that I did understand, I also didn't understand that Chovav was really connected to all this. So every day we got regards from Chovav and also from his 2 brothers, Dudu and Ofer, who were also in the war. And this went on for the whole week from Sunday to Friday. But on Friday, we didn't get regards from Chovav at all. And his mother and father were worried. I wasn't quite sure why they should already be worried because I didn't understand exactly how it works. And on Saturday night, we still hadn't heard from him, and on Sunday as well. And then on Monday, this is already 8 days since he left home, we got letters from Chovav, 2 letters, one for me and one for the family. And in that letter, he told us that he's with his best friend Ze'ev, whose picture I showed you before, in the tank. And he asked me if I'd already bought maternity clothes for my pregnancy. And he wrote all sorts of other things. I don't even remember what. I don't have the letters, actually. And that was basically it. That was Monday. And then on Tuesday evening, Chovav's parents went to a wedding. While they were out, his brother Ofer came home unexpectedly for 48 hours because some guy in his unit had gotten engaged. He wanted to be home for Shabbat, so he and Ofer swapped their coming home for a break. And we were told also that the older brother Dudu was going to come home for 24 hours the next morning. That evening, Libya was playing the piano, his sister, and the parents came home and they saw Ofer. They were very happy to see him. And Ofer did ask what was happening with Dudu and Chovav. And we said, well, Dudu's coming home tomorrow, but Chovav, we don't really know what's happening. And we just hope that he's okay. And then on the Wednesday, I went to Bar-Ilan University, and during one of our lessons, people started talking about a young lady who worked in the library, and they said that her husband had been killed in the war. And then they started discussing if she is expecting a baby or isn't, and I didn't really get why it was important if she was expecting or not, and only afterwards did I realize the importance, the significance of having a child remaining in this world after his father is killed. But at the time, I wasn't quite sure about the actual meaning. As I say, I was very flighty, and there were a lot of things that I didn't get. Anyway, Then I left that class and went outside, and a few girls approached me and told me, they asked me if I'd heard that there was a guy from Kerem Beyavne, from the same yeshiva that Chovav went to, from third year. Chovav was in fifth year. They asked me if I heard that a guy from third year had been killed in the war. So I said, no, I hadn't heard about that. And then, of course, I felt sad for the family. I didn't know the guy, I didn't know his family, but I didn't quite know how to process that information. After that, I went home to the Landau's home on that Wednesday at about noontime. And when I got back home, I saw that my mother-in-law Shula and my sister-in-law Michal had been crying. And I didn't understand why. I asked them and they said, no, it's nothing, there's nothing to say. And I asked them again, and then I took Michal aside and I said to her, like, what's happening? And she said, no, it's nothing. If there was something, we would have told you. So I could see that they didn't want to tell me. I didn't know what to make of it. And I like sort of wasn't quite sure if it had something to do with Chovav, but I could see that they didn't want to say anything. So I didn't press them. But I was sort of walking around, not knowing quite what to do with myself. And then bit by bit, everybody else started coming home. Chovav's father came home from work, and his brother Ofer came home from his errands. His sister came home from her studies. So we were all there. And then eventually Dudu came home from the war for those 24 hours that he was allowed out. And I could see that everybody that came home, eventually people had tears in their eyes, or they were looking very somber, and I couldn't understand why. And I really wanted to know, but they wouldn't tell me. And then Dudu and Michal decided that they were going to go back to their home in Bet El for that night and the next morning, and Dudu would return his wife and children back to us, to the Landwehr family's home. But when he was just putting the last bag in the car before they were due to go off, he saw the army people coming down the road towards him. And he asked them, what do they want? And they said, go inside, we'll tell you. And then his father was standing on the balcony of their home. They lived in a semi-detached home in Ramat Gan on the street level. And the father saw them and said, what do you want? And they said, go inside, we'll tell you. And they went inside. I was in a room way inside the home. I didn't see them coming, but I heard my mother-in-law shouting and screaming. So I ran to the entrance hall of their home and I asked Michal, my sister-in-law, what was happening. And she said, they've come to tell us that Chovav is, she said it in Hebrew, Chovav ne'edar. And I said, what does ne'edar mean? And she said, missing. So I said, well, what does that mean? What's going to happen? So she said, we don't know. We don't know when he'll come back or if he'll come back. And it was all a very big mystery what was going to be. So my reaction at the time, which I haven't really had this reaction before or since, is that I took a book of Tehillim, of Psalms, and started reading, I guess as a way to comfort myself and to put some order into life. And then I remembered that I'd better do something about my parents in South Africa and wanted to decide whether I should tell them that Chovav is missing or not. And so I got my brother-in-law to help me to phone my brother because I was pretty distraught. And we spoke a bit, my brother and I, Ilan and I, and we decided that we're not going to tell my parents yet that Chovav is missing because who knows what's going to happen. Maybe he'll come back sometime, maybe they'll find him, maybe, I don't know. I didn't understand the meaning of it all, but Israelis knew that when a soldier goes missing, the chances of him coming back alive are not very high. But at the time, I didn't know that. So we decided not to say anything to my parents. And then after that, I went to sit next to my mother-in-law in the living room, Shula, and she was talking to two rabbis from the yeshiva of Kerem Beyavne. And at one point they mentioned Ze'ev in their conversation. And I said, what happened to him? And they said that he was killed. And they told me that that was the reason why Shula and Michal, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, were crying when I came home that day. and everybody else after them as well, because they had heard on the radio that Ze'ev Voigtman had been killed, and that his funeral was going to be in the afternoon in his hometown, Rehovot. And they put two and two together and understood that if Ze'ev had been killed and we hadn't heard from Chovav himself or somebody in his stead for 5 days, except for those 2 letters, but letters take time to arrive. So the chances are that Chovav was also killed and we just haven't heard about it yet. So it was a very strange day, that Wednesday. And after that, on the same day, I had a visit from my friends Eva and Naftali Meyer, who live in Petach Tikva. They came to see me, and we were sitting outside together and trying to understand what it means when a soldier is missing. And we were trying to think, maybe he got lost, or maybe he was taken captive, or maybe they're going to use him for propaganda. Who knows? We're trying to figure out, as typical people who have made Aliyah and didn't live in this country and didn't grow up in this country, rather, what could have happened to Chovav. But that night I went to bed thinking that I must be prepared for the fact that Chovav might not come back, and I have to really build up my understanding of that and be prepared. The next day, Thursday, I was sitting outside on a sort of a back patio in the Landois, behind the Landois home, looking at a photo album of my wedding with Chovav. And at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I suddenly heard a shout and a scream from inside the house. So I ran around the side of the house to go in. And I saw my mother-in-law again screaming and shouting. And I asked Michal, my sister-in-law, again, what had happened. And she took me by the face like this with her hands, and she said, he's not coming back. And I started screaming and shouting in English and in Hebrew that he is coming back to me and he will come back to me. And that went on for about 10 minutes, I think, from what I remember. And in the meantime, a doctor had given me, like everybody else, a tablet, a tranquilizer. And then suddenly after 10 minutes, I stopped shouting. And I said, well, if this is what Hashem wants, then I have to accept it with love. And then I remember that I was expecting. So I shouted, oi, the baby. And then I said, well, he'll comfort me. He'll be a comfort to me. And then this started a whole path of being in this mode of only talking about faith and belief in God, and that if this is what God wants, then it's understandable that this is how God organizes the world. And this was my mode for a long time. And a few minutes later, I was sitting in the living room with my friend Shandy. I met her at Bar Ilan University, and she was studying psychology, and she was probably the only person that had the ability to sit next to me in those minutes, just minutes after we'd heard about Chovav being killed. And I said to Shandy, I think I'm really lucky. And she said, lucky? What do you mean? And I said, well, because I knew that Chovav loved me. And I knew that he loved me enough to get married to me and that we were going to build our lives together. As opposed to, for instance, Ze'ev and his girlfriend, Pnina, who maybe didn't know what Ze'ev intended with her. It turned out in the end that he had intended proposing to her. He told a very good friend, but he hadn't gotten around to it yet with her, and he died. So I felt very lucky that I knew where I stood with Chovav and that we'd had the time to build up our relationship and get married. And on the other hand, I knew that I was going to have a baby, but I didn't have him yet. And so I didn't have to try and explain to a child where his father had suddenly disappeared to. So that was what I meant when I said to Shandy that I felt like I was in a good place in the middle, that I was like secure on both sides. And I also said to her that I think I'm lucky because Chovav had been out of the house for 10 days, and I sort of not really forgotten, but I hadn't been close to him in these last 10 days to see how he walks and talks and sings and laughs. And so I'd had a bit of time to distance myself from him. And so maybe it was easier to accept the fact that he's not here now and that he's not going to come back. A few minutes later, again, I remembered my parents in South Africa. And again, I spoke to my brother, Ilan. And we decided, of course, that, we have to tell my parents. So Ilan phoned my mom in Durban in South Africa, and she was ill in bed with the flu. And he phoned and he couldn't get it out. He said, "Ma, I have to tell you something." And he said, "Chovav, Chovav." He couldn't say what had happened. So my mother guessed from the news that she'd heard in general in Israel. She said, "Was he killed in the war?" And he said, "Yes." And she went hysterical. And then my father came home and took the phone and spoke to my brother, and they made the arrangements. But what's amazing is that that week, the times of the flights from South Africa to Israel changed. They'd always been at 12 noon for years. And we got announcements to say that that week it was going to change to 8 o'clock in the evening. So my parents had time to get travelers' checks organized. There was a before the credit card age, and their passports and their summer clothes because there it was winter, and to just get on a plane and come to Israel. They arrived the next morning at about 6 o'clock in the morning at the Landoi home. It was the 18th of June, and the day before, the 17th of June, was my 21st birthday. So it was very sad for us, that reunion. With me being 21 years old, a widow, pregnant, and just a half a year before they'd come to the wedding, and now they were coming to a funeral, and it was very sad for us all. And then later on, before the funeral, at 11 o'clock in the morning, my sister-in-law Michal said to me that she'll be with me at the birth of my child, and I was very grateful to her. I hadn't really thought about it enough. This is Michal. And then it was the funeral, and I've got to move on with the story a little bit so that I don't go over time. But during the Shiva week, it was very strange because everybody that came to me to visit at the Shiva, so I was very into comforting them, and people would comment on it and say, like, to friends of mine, and how come she's so strong? Like, why isn't she crying? And why isn't she distraught? She seems so together. It's not normal. And they said, well, she's just a very strong person. But it turned out a bit different from that, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. Anyway, the Shiva went by and the Shloshim went by, and I went back to South Africa for 2 months with my parents because I really felt that I needed a break and just to try and get my head around all of this in my heart. And they wanted me to stay with them in South Africa. They did suggest it, but I said I wanted to come home. I felt a bit like an alien from a UFO. There wasn't really anybody else in my situation in my community there. And I just felt like I really wanted to be back in Israel with people that I know and with people that I haven't yet met, but people that are going through the things that I'm going through. And I really just wanted to come back to Israel at some point. So about 2 months before the birth, I came back. And my mom came to be with me for the birth. And my son Menachem, our son Menachem, was born in December of 1982. This is him at the age of 2 with his Goldilocks curls and big cheeks. And at his bar mitzvah and how he looks today. And after we got married, I moved to after I had him, I moved to Petach Tikva and went to stay near Eva and Naftali, who I mentioned before. And this was how I met my second husband, through them. But I just want to make a little stop in the story to tell you about what happened actually to Chovav in all this time that I spoke only about myself. So as I told you, Chovav left home on the 6th of June. And they went to their yeshiva, and then from there they were taken north to their army base in the north. And then on the Wednesday, they were told that they're going to have to go north into Lebanon. And apparently they were quite scared about that. And Ze'ev, his friend, taught them, he sat with them and he decided to try and calm them down. So he taught them from a book of the Rambam about war or something like that. And that seemed to calm them down. And then they got up and they sang and they danced and they kind of felt themselves more uplifted and more able to deal with the whole thing. And on Thursday, they really did have to go north into Lebanon with their tanks. But there was some sort of a big mistake with the intelligence that was collected for this job that they were given to do. And it turned out that they like landed in an ambush that they hadn't been aware of, and that there were enemy forces on a ridge above the valley that they drove into with their tanks that they didn't know about before. And you might have heard, I suppose, of this battle. It's called the Sultan Yaakov battle, from which there are still 2 remaining missing soldiers who have never come back from that battle, and one that was missing until 2 years ago and was returned. I don't know if the name sounds familiar to you, Zachariah Barwell. He was an American citizen, actually, and he was returned 2 years ago. He was in that battle. That was where he went missing. And Yuda Katz, that was also in Keren B'Yavne Yeshiva, and another one, Zvi Feldman, they are still missing to this day and haven't yet been returned to Israel. So that battle was really very difficult, and 20 guys were killed, 20 soldiers were killed in that battle. And so that means that it was on the Thursday night, Friday, on the 10th, 11th of June. So that means that on the Monday, when we got letters from Chovav, he was no longer alive, but we didn't know that at the time. And it also means that on the Tuesday night, when Shula and Dov went to a wedding, so they went as bereaved parents. I mean, they didn't go as bereaved parents, they were bereaved parents, and they didn't realize it at the time. And I told you that Ofer came home that evening and that Libya was playing the piano. So why is it important that Libya was playing the piano? Because 2 guys that had been in the battle came to our home on the Tuesday evening to pay a shiva call. And they didn't know that we didn't know. And I don't know if they would have realized that they couldn't see a muda'at ever, like an announcement of Chavav's death on the gate of the home, but they heard the piano. And they understood that if somebody's playing the piano in our home, then it means that we don't yet know about Chavav's death. And so they went to stand one at one end of the small road that they lived in, and another at the other end of the road. And they basically stayed there for many hours that night to make sure that nobody else would come to try and pay us a shiva call when Libya would stop playing the piano. And they might not notice also that there was no announcement of the death on the gate or the door, and might come knocking on the door by mistake and saying something before the army had gotten to us to tell us. Because it's basically an accepted thing in Israel that regular people don't tell a family that they've been bereaved. It has to come through the channels of the army. Although these days it's a little bit different with all these WhatsApp messages and things have happened that have been mistaken or whatever. But at the time, that was certainly very strictly guarded, and that was how it worked. So that was on the Tuesday night that these guys came to protect us from getting a shiva call that we weren't ready for yet. And on the next morning, I told you that I had been to Bar Ilan University and that I heard about a woman who'd been widowed and they didn't know if she was pregnant or not. She turned out that she wasn't. I became a friend of hers afterwards. But I certainly understood afterwards what it meant to be pregnant in the situation and how important it was to have somebody to carry on Chovav in this world through Menachem. And also when these girls came to ask me if I heard that a guy from Kerem Beyavne had been killed, they said third year, Chovav was in fifth year, but they actually meant Chovav, and they were trying to ascertain if I knew anything, but they could see that I didn't know anything. And so they knew that there's no point in talking to me at all about it. And so I'll carry on with my own story, with my own life. As I say, I went to live in Petach Tikva near Eva and Naftali. And I went to a support group for Almanot Sahel, for war widows. But I was totally on this path of talking about emunah and about strength. And I couldn't quite understand why all these widows were crying so much and were so bereft. I just wasn't there yet. I'll explain that in a minute. I'll get to that in a minute. But in the meantime, I want to go on with my story. And here is where my present day husband, Jonathan, enters the scene. We met when he was studying in dental school, which is why you can see him studying here in this picture. And he and Menachem made an immediate connection with each other, and they were very sweet together. And we got married in September of 1984. And after that, this is Jonathan's family. They're originally from America, actually, from different places. I won't go into it because I have no time. But 2 years later, we had our son, Ori. And just after Ori was born, about 2 months after Ori was born, something changed within me. I started realizing, it started sinking in about that Chovav had died. And there was one morning when Jonathan went to shul, when Ori was about 2 months old, and he came back on Shabbat morning, and he saw me sitting on the sofa crying, and he asked me what had happened. And I said to him, Chovav was killed. And he said, I know. What do you mean? And I said, it's just sunk in now. I just now finally realize and understand what that means. And this is 4.5 years after Chovav had been killed. And it just started sinking in. Maybe because Jonathan was with me at the birth of Ori, and so I could compare what it was like to give birth when the father is there or isn't there. Maybe that's what triggered it. I don't know. But that's what happened. So I went to a social worker of the Defense Ministry, and she put me onto a psychologist of the Defense Ministry. And she saw me for 8 months. I went to her, and the treatment was to write letters to Chovav in order to backtrack my life with him so that I would be able to say goodbye from a point of knowing what it was that we had together. And that was what I did in those 8 months. When that was coming to an end, or I decided that it was coming to an end, we moved to the north. Jonathan got a job as a dentist near our yeshuv where we live, which is Mitzpenetufah in the Galilee. I'm sorry, I'm like jumping forward so much, but that's how it is when one doesn't really have much time. I'm sorry. That's my fault that we don't have time also. So we went to live in Mitzpenetufah in this beautiful area in the Lower Galilee. This was the caravan that we lived in, and this is the house that we live in. Not a very good photo, but anyway. And here in Mitzpenetufah, I did the last stage of my therapy with a friend of mine here, which was to bury something that belonged to Chovav. So I just took a pair of old sunglasses that were broken anyway, and went with this friend Esther to bury it in the earth of the Galilee. And by doing that, having my own little burial ceremony in order to really put Chovav at rest. And I felt that that all really helped me a lot. Now I'm going to be moving forward very far into the more present years. In 2012, we made a movie about Chovav for the 30 years of his death, commemorating his death. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you that Yakir was also born in 1990. We had Yakir, a third son. All my kids are very big cheeks and curly hair. So we've got the same model throughout. Anyway, so going back to my story, in 2012, we made this movie about Chovav commemorating his death. It's all in Hebrew. I could send it to you if you can understand it. I don't know. And there were two things that I learned during the time that we were making the movie. One of them was from my friend Shandy, and the other one from my brother-in-law Dudu. And Shandy, when I was telling her that we were making this movie, she said that actually in the days before, after Chovav was killed and before we heard about it, she and another friend, Aliza, were walking around Bar Ilan University with me, and they could see that people were really uncomfortable because a lot of people knew that Chovav had been killed, but the family didn't know yet. I didn't know yet. And people were starting to get really nervous. Like, what are we supposed to do with this young lady? She doesn't know that she's a widow. So Shandy and this friend went to the rabbi of the campus, Rav Hess, and said to him, you know, you've got to do something. So he phoned up the army, a certain branch of the army, and told them what's happening. And that was why they decided to come and tell us that Chovav was missing, in order to buy some time before they could give us the final answer the next day that he had been killed, because there was some matter of identification. I'm not quite sure what. They said something about that because he was married, it was important that there be even more identification. I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, that was what they said. The other revelation, so I didn't know about this. I didn't know from Shandy before that she had this whole situation with me, and we'd been friends for all these years. But I don't blame her. It's just how it was. And then Dudu's revelation was that on that morning, the Thursday morning, before they came to tell us that Chovav was killed, he really wanted to know what was happening. So he went to a pay box near his parents' home and phoned the army and asked them what's going on with Chovav. And they said, we'll come back to you. Somebody will come to you. And Dudu understood from that means that Chovav is not alive. And he somehow made it back to his parents' home on his bicycle, or not on his bicycle. His legs were shaking, he said. And he had to carry this alone for a few hours until the army came back to us and told us that he had been killed. So that was an amazing time when we discovered all this. And then coming near to the end of my story, very near to the end, my son Menachem decided that he wanted to go overseas to travel and to work in about 2017. And while he was in Slovakia, as one of the places, he was painting paintings all over Europe in different places. And while he was in Slovakia, he was asked by a guy who has a cultural center there to paint a painting on one of the walls, and he needed a model for the painting, 2 models. And so this guy suggested a young lady named Hanka and her sister to be the models of the painting. This is something in Greek mythology. I don't really remember the name of the story in Greek mythology that it represents, but this is the painting that Menachem did. And Hanka is the one with the black hair sitting up. And they met each other through this, and they became closer and closer. She's not Jewish, unfortunately. But the ultimate result of all that was that they got really close and they were in a relationship together. And eventually Menachem came back Pesach 2 years ago to tell us that Hanka is expecting, which was difficult for us because she's not Jewish, and that was hard for us. But the result is this little girl named Ayala Noah. They gave her an Israeli name, a Jewish name. Is now almost 1.5 years old. She's not Jewish, but who knows what will happen in life. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she'll discover that she wants to be later on in life. We can't know. But at least we have a granddaughter. We don't have any others at the moment. We will have, please God, one day. And we look forward in our lives with our children who are all not religious. They all chose not to be religious, each one for his own reason, reading philosophy, learning different things, and deciding that they don't want to live a religious life. But they're very good people, and have a lot of kavod towards us. And they honor us very much and respect us very much, and they do what we do on Shabbat when they're here. So that's a big thing. And we can just hope to be all healthy and move forward in our lives. So that's basically my story, and I can stop the share screen now. These are my details if anybody wants to take a photo of them or write them down or get them from Cheryl or whatever the case may be. And after that, I can stop the share screen. If anybody wants to ask a quick question or anything like that, I'd be happy. Tell me when you think I should stop the share screen.
Piera, thank you. I think we could stop the sharings at this point, and if people have questions, they could put it on the chat. That way you can read it and respond.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you. Yeah, actually, I wanted to show you a part of a movie that that they made of the battle, but I figured that I might not have time, and I think I won't have time, but I will send it to you through Cheryl so that you can see it and tell you which actual minutes in the movie to look at so that you can see. The movie relates to the whole thing of the battle. Oh, you know, I forgot to tell you. I'm sorry. I have to tell you one more thing. It doesn't matter about the share screen. I don't need it. One of the really important things I forgot to tell you is that in 2018, Dudu, my brother-in-law, suggested that we have a memorial, a HaZikaron for Chovav, because it was 18 plus 18 years. It was 36 years since he died. He said, let's have a meeting with friends and family, and they can talk about Chovav and tell about Chovav and also about the battle. And to cut a long story short, when we'd all finished talking about him at that particular HaZikaron, the Yortzeit for Chovav, suddenly Dudu, who was summing up the meeting and with all of us, he looked at me and he looked at Libya, my sister-in-law, and he said, by the way, you know that Chovav was killed by friendly fire, right? And I said, I didn't know that. And Libya said also, I didn't know that. And we questioned Dudu afterwards. And he said, but I told you years ago, didn't I? And we said, no, this is the first time we hear of it. And it turned out that during the Shiva, the commander of the battalion had taken Dudu aside and told him that Chovav was killed by friendly fire, which is what appears in the movie, the footage about this whole issue. And he was sure that he had told us. Dudu was absolutely positive that he had told us. And when we told him that we didn't know, he was shocked. Like, he really, really thought that we knew. He said he didn't want to tell his parents at the beginning, or any of us, because he didn't want them to be even more hurt and even more upset. So he kept it from them, which is understandable. But he just didn't remember that he hadn't told us, and it was totally new to us. So Cheryl's saying about the movie, I will send it to you and tell you which minutes to look at. So I'm sorry, I just
finished. Just check.
yeah.
That.
So that's it.
Thank you. Piera, if there's anyone else that would like to direct a question, please, as I said, put it on chat so that Piera can see it and respond.
I just might share the comment. I just want to thank you for letting us into your heart, and the tears that I shed during your presentation definitely added to the depth of the meaning of what today is, but also to the hakaras hatov that we all have to have for all those who played roles in the past and keep the safety of Medinat Yisrael so that it can be the thriving society it is, that many people were part of such a majestic state and stage in Jewish history, that we all have a very deep debt to them all. And Hashem bless you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you
Piera,
very much.
I want to thank you and thank Cheryl for sharing such a moving story, and personally want to say that I'm hopeful that those who heard you will gain new insight each Shabbat when we recite the prayer for Tzahal. May you and your family continue to do well and prosper and be safe for you and for Medinat Yisrael.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Cheryl. I really appreciate it. And it was really very special for me to be able to talk to you. I'm sorry that I can't get to know you more, but that's how it goes with these things. And yeah, it's very special for me to know that there are people in the world in your area that know more about Chovav and about the day that we are in now. And it's very, very special.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks again to our sponsor for helping to
Thank
bring
you,
this program to us, Cheryl Share. Thank you.
Thank
Edelman
you.
was supposed to be anonymous, Reva. Ah. Well,
So
I guess
you-
everybody here knows me.
You made the connection. You made the connection for us. You're the
Okay.
you're the
okay.
connect
That's
you're
a
the
good one.
connected friend.
Okay. Now, luckily we got connected.
Very good.
Yeah, thank God. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I even lit the candle.
Well done.
Cheers,
L'chaim.
I'm drinking water, but l'chaim with water, I think mine is chaim, right?
Nachon, nachon. Now we're going into Yom Ha'atzmaut, and I think the transition is very special personally, that we,
Yeah,
know
one
how
day,
to
maybe one day I'll
appreciate-
be there.
yeah.
Um,
praise God.
For those who are local here, we part of our HaZikaron program continues at 7:15 this evening in Shul, followed by Mincha, and then Tefillah Chagigit, festive davening for Yom Ha'atzmaut.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Thanks.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
That's right.